Well, everyone, welcome to our monthly podcast with our Canadian contingency that gives us vital information at this critical juncture that we find ourselves. We have the one and only Mr. Norman Traversy, and we have returning guest, Mr. Daniel Mesrobian, and we're very excited to talk to them about all things geopolitical, financial in regards to Canada and the whole of the world is all interconnected. As you know, if you're new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share so the channel can grow and others can gain in the knowledge you've been afforded. As you know, Norman is a Canadian resident in the area of Ottawa, lifelong resident, and he is a patriot. He's been galvanizing the people, and he calls himself affectionately a resident troublemaker. And then we also have Mr. Daniel Mesrobian, who is a CFO, retired CFO from a couple of major Canadian banks, and also has a lot of Swiss banks connections, and is just rife with replete of financial experience that we want to leverage at this point for the benefit of you, the people. So, gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Excellent.
Swell. How are
Excellent,
you?
John.
Well, it's great to see you guys. Thanks for being here, and appreciate it on this fast and furious Monday. So, Norman, we'll start with you as we always do with respect, since it all started with you. Tell the folks, if you would, what the latest updates are with Canada as a whole. What progress do you see, and what things do you think still need to be improved?
Last December, Canada has already officially acknowledged the First Nations as a separate nation. And there's a group called the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, the AIN, which is a worldwide group. It includes the Maori of New Zealand, the Aborigines. It's a worldwide group of First Nations. And we're having an election in a week. And the press, the Canadian press, is trying to make it look like it's neck and neck. But it's much like Trump and Biden. The biggest rally in Canadian history was for Pierre Poilievre, the conservative candidate, and his opponent, the Liberal, Mark. Well, what's his name again, Danie? I can't even remember his name.
Mark Carney.
Carney. Yeah, Carney. He's a Carney. He can't even fill a room. He can't even fill a room, and his rooms, when he does have an event, they put mirrors on the walls to make it look like there's much more people than there really are. This Liberal candidate was appointed. He wasn't elected. He calls himself prime minister. He's supposed to be a caretaker until we get a real prime minister, and he is even further to the left of Justin Trudeau. So he's a disaster. He's a chronic liar, and he will lie, and people will check on his lie, and he'll be found out in minutes. And he also was found guilty of plagiarism on his doctorate thesis. So this guy's a train wreck. He's also been photographed with Ghislaine Maxwell, and we know about Ghislaine Maxwell, the procurer for Jeffrey Epstein, who's been found guilty. And where he's photographed with Ghislaine Maxwell is on his own estate in London, England. And this was after Epstein was found guilty. So he runs in that crowd. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, and I'm sure Danie would agree, if he gets elected, the province of Alberta is out of Canada. Right, Danie?
Maybe not the only province coming out of Canada.
Yeah, exactly. And I talked to the leader of the delegation that went to Washington from Alberta, and he said they are now in talks at the U.S. cabinet level, and that it's only a matter of whether Alberta becomes a separate country, a protectorate of the United States, or the 51st state. He said it's a done deal. So that's what's going on. We've also got the oldest company in Canada, one of the oldest in the world, established 1670, is the Hudson Bay Company. And they are now auctioning their grant, the act that actually incorporated this company from Charles II of England. in 1670, and they want to auction it off. Well, I've got copies that including scanned copies of this act, and the Alliance of Indigenous Nations is now going over it to see what exactly is in there. And what they think and what I think is that this act that formed the Hudson Bay Company was much like a farmer saying, yeah, you can go hunt on my land. You know, give me a case of beer and you can hunt on my land. That doesn't mean he's giving you his land. It just means you can use it for a certain purpose. And what we believe, we haven't made certain of it yet, but what we believe is that the indigenous people granted this company the rights to trap fur on the land, but they didn't give them the land. And also there's the matter of whether Canada ever was a country or is a country. And Queen Victoria died in 1901. And when she died, she left no heir in right of Canada. So the king that came after her, he was king of Britain. He wasn't king of Canada. And that fraud has been going on since 1901. And I was asked by the Indigenous nations to go to the National Archives of Canada and get a copy of a document. They told me exactly the file number, the whole bit they wanted a copy. And it was a letter from King George VI to the Prime Minister of Canada, Mackenzie King. And apparently it was a letter patent that would have asked the king to appoint a governor general. And I went to the archives and they said, yes, we do have that document, but it's sealed by law. No one can look at it. And I said, can you look at it? He says, no. I said, can anyone look at it? No. So can you imagine if you, John, said, we have a constitution here in the United States, but you can't look at it. That's the equivalent of what's going on in Canada. So we've got the Hudson Bay wanting to auction off their charter, and we've got a document that supposedly appoints a governor general, which is the highest office in the land. The governor general is above the prime minister. The prime minister is a minister of the crown and serves at the behest of the crown. The crown can fire the prime minister anytime. And the way the crown would fire the prime minister is through the governor general. So the governor general has all the powers and duties of the crown, supposedly. So we've got a woman here, Mary Simon, and she's parading around in a red uniform festooned with gold and calling herself the governor general. But she's not. And if she's not the governor general, then the prime minister is not the prime minister, and the government of Canada is not. And the Supreme Court is fraud. And what I did was, I've already told you on the last podcast about the quo warrantos. Well, I sent them in on this federal court hearing about Prime Minister Trudeau proroguing Parliament, which means he put Parliament on hold. It wasn't doing anything until the election. So they had a hearing, an emergency hearing about that. And what I did was, before the hearing, days before, I sent them the quo warrantos and the letter to the Judge Advocate General saying that the government was fraudulent. So they locked me out of that hearing, and they sent the police to arrest me, 6 Ottawa cops. So I think it's going to come out that everything is a fraud here in Canada, and God bless the United States. You know, I know 1777, the Articles of Confederation, Section 11 invited Canada, if it wanted to join. And my ancestor, Toussaint Traversy, was one of the leaders of a revolution in 1838, where we tried to join, and they were going to hang him. But instead, they fined him £1,000, which was a king's ransom, and exiled him to Ottawa. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I don't speak French.
If I'm not mistaken, Norman, your grandfather fought with the U.S. troops at that time, right?
My ancestor,
Ancestor.
Joseph Traversy,
Okay.
and he fought in the 2nd Canadian Regiment of the Continental Army of the United States. So there were 2 regiments from Canada that fought for the United States. And guess who raised those regiments? Benedict Arnold. He raised the regiment, and he was a great general. The Revolutionary War would not have been won without Benedict Arnold. He won a major naval engagement on a lake, and he saved the U.S. I know he betrayed the U.S. later, but he was a really brilliant general, and he raised those regiments. And my ancestor, I believe he was a dispatch rider for George Washington, carrying messages from Washington to France.
Wow.
Which would make sense. So we've been at this for a while.
To say the least. Well, thanks, Norman, for the wonderful, direct and yet succinct update. Appreciate it as always. This is a question for both of you because it's just the elephant in the room we can't ignore. This morning, I woke up to a flurry of activity before we segue, Daniel, to the financial, because as you said earlier offline, everything interplays each other, and rightly so. We got news today, which we all know, the 3 of us, and I think a majority of the constituents of our audience knows that this gentleman was dealt with quite a long time ago. But for optics, the fake Pope was announced dead today at 88, shortly after Resurrection Sunday yesterday. And I'm just wondering, either one of you or both of you, your impressions on that.
Yeah, I think he was gone. Go ahead, Danie.
Well, one has to be careful about what one says about the Pope. But I think it may well herald a brand new age because, as we know, the Pope was a Jesuit, and the entire Vatican was under Jesuit control. Perhaps, I think this is the first time that's ever happened. So I think this portends some really big changes. Norman?
Yeah, he was a Jesuit, and the Jesuits got involved early on in Lower Canada in the 1600s, 1700s, and you know what the native people did to the Jesuits? They ate them. They did. There's a memorial in Midland, Ontario, and I was raised a Catholic, so I had to learn the whole story about Father Brebeuf, and yeah, they ate him.
I guess that was the first keto diet for the indigenous.
Yeah, they were health conscious people.
It's taking carnivore to a whole other level.
Well, they made a movie about it called The Black Robe.
Huh.
Do you remember that,
With
Danie?
Sean Connery.
Was it No, that was Name of the Rose.
No, that's the Name of the Rose. You're right.
Yeah. No, The Black Robe was about the Jesuits in Canada.
I'm have to look that up. Well, thank you, Norman, once again, and Daniel for that. And yes, I agree with you both that it is heralding an entire new age. In fact, it's interesting enough as a segue, Daniel, to the financial. Klaus Schwab, or as I call him, Klaus Schwab, he stepped down around the same time, 88, and there's a lot of signals with Trump at 88 and the comms and the Q posts, back to the future, signaling the new age or a return to the old standard, gold standard, if you will. kind of perseverating there a little bit on the details. So, Daniel, I'm going to open us up to you. There's a lot of ways we can slice this pie, and Norman, feel free to jump in, of course, as always. You know that you're the lead dog here. A lot going on in the world. We saw gold at all-time highs this morning. The London index, as you probably saw last night, went below 99 for the dollar index. What's the dollar hate? Competition. What's it getting? Lots of it with gold, lots of it with the foreign currency market. Silver's up, trending back to all-time highs. It's in 30s now, but it's going to come up. The oil, the Brent crude WTI is trending downward. It hit, I think, a week and a half ago below 59 in the Texas side, very significant. So you have this perfect storm, as we see it on our side of the team, converging for the global reset we've talked about many times. So I'm just going to ask you, in your experiential knowledge, what do you say to all this?
Well, as I said this before, John, my view is that one of the aspects of the Great Reset, hopefully a global reset, is that we're going to move from a world that's based on lies is a strong word, but misinformation, to a world based on truth or hard data. And I think that's inevitable because we've taken all this time to build up an information economy. But if we're populating the information economy with garbage data, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. So we have to go through this transition where we start filtering what we're using in terms of information in our daily lives, manufacturing processes, the commodity markets, etc. And all the recent discussions we've had, for instance, on the zero tariff reciprocal trade, I think it opens up that discussion. And I'll give you a very simple example. Let's talk about pickup trucks. Right now, you got pickup trucks that are running at 100,000. Now, I know that there are some people that will want to buy a $100,000 pickup truck, but a lot of people are looking for a $35,000 or $45,000 pickup truck. And if we were to open up conclude a zero tariff reciprocal trade agreement with the U.S., and we did that on a bilateral basis, and we did that with all our trade partners, just as the U.S. did, that might be one way of fixing what I call the $100,000 pickup truck problem, because the reason we have those pickup trucks that are so expensive, and it's not just trucks, it's a lot of things we're buying that are far too expensive. And the reason is that they're burdened by the engineering which is required to integrate the lies that they have to operate under. For instance, the climate lie, or the surveillance lie, that, everything has to be surveilled on the truck, including you, the owner, even though the owner doesn't own the information. And that extends to a lot of things, including the commodity markets. And I'll just give you a quick example there that, a lot of people talk about peak oil. And there are some other people like the late Mr. Prouty, who actually worked in the Pentagon for some time, Fletcher Prouty, who would often make the point that oil is not a fossil fuel. It's a renewable resource. So you can see how the entire economic fabric is sort of interwoven with information and disinformation. And we carry the cost burden of that. Maybe one way of busting that is to try and move towards, zero tariff reciprocal trade, because if we're allowed, as Canada say, to engage in bilateral agreements, trade agreements with both America and, say, people in Southeast Asia, parties and counterparties in Southeast Asia, we can give people the choice between a $100,000 pickup truck or a $35,000 pickup truck. So I see that as a solution, and I see that discussion as being positive and constructive.
Well, I agree 100%. Go ahead, Nor, please.
Danie's talking about lies, and the lie in Canada is biggest lie is about carbon. We have, with the exception of Russia, more trees than any other country on the planet. And those trees sequester an amazing astronomical amount of carbon. Canada slurps up carbon. We don't emit carbon, period. We're the ones that sequester the carbon. So we should get a get out of jail free card on that.
We should get a check.
Yeah, we should get a check.
Yeah, from the BIS, a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. For our good work, sequestering carbon.
So basically, Norman, you're saying that Canada's carbon porous, essentially.
Not even porous. We're like a sponge. We're sucking up the carbon into our
We're one of the
trees.
great air filters of the planet.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
And Trump's talked about that. He's a lot of trees in the U.S. If Canada becomes part of the U.S., then it becomes by default or de facto another resource for renewable energy, like trees.
Yeah, and trees grow back.
Yeah. Well,
but John, irrespective of whether Canada does or doesn't become much closer with the U.S., we both have the same problem.
Yeah.
And that is that we're struggling under a burden of lies. And this is a parasitic overlay on our society, in our economies, that are both very costly in terms of dollars and in terms of human life. And I think we both have to address the corruption issue before we can engage in any efficient trade. And that was the point I was trying to come up with the pickup trucks. The issue is not really trade. The issue is honest trade. What are we trading? And is our trade burdened by a framework and a meshwork of lies? And when you sit down with a trade partner and come out an agreement, are you forcing that person into your meshwork of lies, and vice versa?
This has happened before. The Catholic Church, speaking of the Pope, they used to sell dispensations. So if you did something, if you sinned, you could go to a bishop or a priest, and he would sell you a dispensation. And some guy came along and nailed something to a door. Martin Luther, remember? The 97 Theses? And he said, this is bullshit. And 30-year war, and then we got the Protestant church, because the Protestants weren't going along with this, selling dispensations.
Yeah. A couple of things, guys.
Go ahead, if I could just interject here.
Sure.
Norman has raised the issue about different religious beliefs. And in my experience traveling the world and trying to come to agreement with people that have very disparate backgrounds, the one way that you can come to agreement very quickly and overcome those religious differences is if you say, look, if the word for your God and truth is interchangeable, then we end up on the same side. And I think that's universally true.
Very good.
Interesting. And hadn't thought of it that way. That's interesting. Daniel, a couple of quick thoughts for you guys, to each of your really important insights. So Norman, going back to what you were talking about trees, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't normally share this story, but it just seems very apropos with what we're talking about, because you're right, trees grow back. My dad, who's been retired for a while, used to work for a company called, I'm sure you know, Daniel, International Paper. And one of the big subsidiaries, Hammermill Paper, providing, print paper and many other various products, toilet paper, paper towels and such, industrial for commercial use. So I used to go to the mills as a kid and see these gigantic rolls and all the smelliness of the very unpleasant smell, because when it comes out, it's basically pulp. Then it has to be hard, and it uses 5 sources of energy just to harden and dry it to what we get to use today. But I got a chance to go to different factories and to different paper farms, if you will, or tree farms, I should say. And I noticed that for every one tree they took down, they actually planted 3 back. So it was a 3-to-1 ratio. Not everybody might realize that. So I thought that was an important point to raise, to validate, your talking point. It is very much true. And also, people, we see this overplanting, and particularly in suburbs. I'm sure you see it there in Canada and certain, Toronto and city-esque areas where there's like an overabundance of trees on a block. You really actually only need one healthy tree to have enough carbon oxygen to power up an entire city block in terms of proper oxygenation for that area. You don't need, as we tend to overplant because we've been sold on this idea of abundance in one area and then, to Danie's point, lack in another. And that it's just straight out lies and manipulation. So Daniel, going to your about the reciprocal trade tariffs, you're absolutely right. The couple of things I wanted to comment to your cogent point is, I still believe that Argentina is going to be the baseline for the rest of BRICS and the rest of the countries, because they came out over a month ago and Trump and Milei said a zero tariff, right? Just reciprocal tariff, as you know, is just a mirroring. Whatever they do, we're going to do, or vice versa. It's all it is. It's nothing more than that. And I think that Argentina is going to be the baseline for how the rest of BRICS goes. Interestingly enough, Vietnam, one of the first ones, the Vietnamese dong currency that our audience knows well, has already come to the table and made trade agreements. Now, what many are starting to realize that they might not have known initially is that what he's doing is leveling the playing field, which creates a level of transparency, removes the lies of manipulation, meaning President Trump. So in Vietnam, if you guys have traveled, you know that over there, it's relatively inexpensive to live, to buy food, to buy goods, and so forth. But what you have is a disproportionate currency against the dollar, because they're hiding the value of the dong. They're manipulating and artificially suppressing it. Same thing with Iraq, right? The rate on the Forex is not the real rate of the dinar and dong. That's a suppressed, manipulated rate. And that's only supposed to happen for about a year, and yet it's been going on for decades. So what Trump is doing is he's exposing that. So it may cost a little more for people in Vietnam to live, but their currency is going to have real value based on assets in the ground. It's also going to make it easier for America/Canada to get goods exported out to Vietnam and actually sell it instead of being bypassed like it's been to this point. Does that make sense, Daniel, in your economic landscape?
Well, that makes a lot of sense, John, because the fact of the matter is, until you've got good, vibrant international trade, if there's very low demand for your currency outside of your borders, it's very easy to manipulate and fix your currency. So the more trade you generate, the more likely you're going to have, quote unquote, a cleaner currency. So yeah, I think the White House has got it dead right there.
Yeah.
And and moreover, I think that this whole approach to zero tariffs, in like your reciprocal trade agreements, bilateral agreements, that's really going to force into the light of day a lot of things that don't make sense, that would otherwise be protected. So I agree with you. And I think that Argentina is really like a good textbook case, because they're undertaking not just a cleanup, it would appear, of their bureaucracy. They're actually restructuring their economy, which means they're going to get rid of a lot of stuff they don't need. That's the parasitic layer I'm talking about on both society and the economy, that you have to rid yourself of before you can move into a world of abundance.
Absolutely.
And it's that parasitic layer that's keeping you in a world of scarcity and high costs. That and poor monetary policy, I agree. You can't ignore the monetary policy, but there are fiscal things that work here.
Well, exactly. But you're also right what you said to me, Daniel, offline about really it's a spiritual warfare battle. We're going through what Revelations talked about in the Bible. They're going to call evil good and evil. Wood is a drink, and everything's upside down is right side up. And we've got to. It's like if you planted a pot or whatever of a plant upside down, and it's now you got to flip it right side up and level it out. That's literally.
And men or women.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah,
a whole
it
other
is true
discussion.
that everywhere we look right now, we're in an inverted world. So we have to turn that right side up, and it's not so much one thing at a time; it's everything at once.
Yeah,
we have to change the standard, and that's why I say, if we can all unite around something as simple that, if your God, whoever your God is, must certainly be interchangeable with truth. And if we can get all on the same script, that effectively the enemy we face is lies, that's the evil, then we can start scrubbing that infrastructure of lies and that parasitic overlay of lies
Mm.
out of our economies, out of our societies. And that's how we move to a world of abundance. I'm quite convinced of that.
I agree. And I really think of it all the time in visual terms, Daniel, as a spiritual power washing. You ever watch guys power wash a wall or something or brick, and they got to really get in there and deep clean it. And that's, we need that draining the swamp on a real level. So, Daniel, a couple other little follow-up questions to this subject, because this has tranches and layers that could go, to infinity. But just to be, as you said, rightly succinct for the audience sake, wanted to get you kind of your comments or thoughts about a couple of things. France came out last week and said that if Trump does this, it's really going to be detrimental to the dollar. But remember, there's two different dollars. There's the Federal Reserve dollar, which has no reserves and is not federal at all. That's from the maritime law from England, right? That's not our dollar, that's their dollar. So aren't they really saying it's going to hurt their old, because we know Europe is all screwed up. I mean, look what's going on in Germany, and France is, they're cuckoo. So, isn't that really going to hurt what they're saying in code? It's going to hurt the old cabal system. Isn't that what they mean?
Well, look, the fiat currency and the discussion about the fiat currency, that's a tough one until we straighten out the basis. There's a lot of discussion right now about moving the US dollar to a commodity or a gold basis or something of real value, which I think is consistent with your original constitution. You could correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
And I think that would be fairly easy technically to accomplish. It's just a question of the pegging to how much. Once that's sorted out, then I think we can move into a world where trade happens a lot easier with a lot more confidence. And if we can move into a world of zero tariff reciprocal trade, in which we can scrub out a lot of, as I say, the disinformation that's engineered into some of our trade, that's what's going to sort out the disagreement. All of the discussion that's currently going on really is noise. And what settles the issues is living standards. And as soon as the Europeans see that our living standards are rising and theirs are falling, as for instance, Germany is deindustrializing, I think they'll come around.
Well, that's what we have to wait and see, right? Like you said, right? We have to see this whole thing play out. But just to give you guys our overview of things as a brief synopsis to your right point, here's what we see happening. So Doge is going to be coming out with some dividend checks, right? Which you look at the U.S. debt clock, you can see the money is pooling in our favor. There's a $169 trillion influx of monies from all the theft that's been going on over a long protracted period of time, like a slingshot comes back the other way with equal or greater force. So you see already taxes are pretty much eliminated. We have Senator Mike Lee of Utah here in America has already called vocally to abolish the Fed and to abolish income tax. President Trump's already well on his way doing that because he knows 85% of the country makes $150,000. So he's going bottom up instead of what the deep state did when they started the Fed, top down, right? So you're seeing the taxes issue, which is going to lead to Elon Musk's live stream of the Fort Knox audit, which they will find, I think the emperor has no clothes, right? Transparency. Then you lead to an audit of the Fed, because once people see, hey, we don't have the gold we have, or we don't have the amount that we thought, or it's not real, it's not pure, it begets other questions. So then the Fed comes in, which goes to your cogent point about going back to the gold standard. Yes, one-to-one pegging, right? And what that has for implications globally. And then ultimately the source of the problem, the private Western central bank, as I've said before, Trump will be the third president in history behind Andrew Jackson to eliminate the private Western central bank. Almost got him killed. We saw President Trump almost got killed last year. So you see the patterns emerging. So I think that's how we're going to decouple it. I'm just curious to get your impressions from on the other side of the proverbial pond. And with all of your robust financial experience, Daniel, you knew the Keynesian system well, but you also saw inherent flaws in it. And you could see that it really was artificial. So that's why I think your insight is so invaluable.
Well, my background as an economist and someone who, worked in a central bank, is that the Keynesian approach, it's a tool, it's a framework, but it's also corrupted by a whole series of assumptions that aren't well articulated. I'm much more of a quant. And so my view is the data tells you what works and what doesn't work. And you shouldn't be chained by any ideology, whether it's Keynesianism or monetarism or whatever. The
Mhm.
data will tell you what works. And whatever model you're going to use is going to change because the markets are people and the people learn. And so the model changes. Uh, and so, I just keep coming back to this point that we are burdened by this overlay of ideology, of lies, of parasitic uh, infrastructure. And we have to get rid of that. And we've got to start looking at the information and the data with open eyes.
Mhm. Agreed, and that's what the three of us are working to kind of pull the proverbial layers back. That actually brings up another interesting subpoint for both of you that I would like to ask you. So here in America, we have already seen last year. I think we talked about this last time. We've seen the commercial real estate market just completely implode. By it's the real numbers are probably 75%, but they're saying 50%. We know that's bogus. Um, but one thing I've been watching very closely, right? Because we've talked about currencies. We've even talked about cryptos, talked about precious metals, certain bonds, et cetera. But land, right, is going to become really important for people to own globally, particularly here in North America, which you fall, obviously. So I'm watching the short-term 10 and 30-year treasury bond yields, and I'm seeing a yield inversion curve going on there. To your point, Daniel, earlier, it's inverted and upside down. So that's very apropos to the discussion. My question is, they're not talking a lot about the residential real estate market, which part of the transparency is showing the people that the system has not worked. It's going time to go back to basics. God's money, gold and silver are a fair and true measurement that don't fluctuate like fiat currencies do based on nothing. But that has implications for real estate. We are waiting here very shortly, we believe, in our team, somewhere around June, to see the residential real estate market really start to pop like a dam, because you have a case where you have people losing their jobs. You have a glut of properties on the market, no one to buy them because of the reason I mentioned. Same thing's going on with the auto market. Since you brought that up with trucks, it's going on with the car market. You have a supply and demand inversion. Why wouldn't you have that with residential real estate? So we see that going on from June onward. 17 years ago, we saw the too big to fail with the banks and the implications it had on the real estate. Isn't that kind of what's going to happen all over again? And how is that being effectuated to you guys in Canada?
Well, I think if I can just interject, look, I think you're right about the real estate market. And I'm just going to point out that, this whole issue about unburdening ourselves from a framework of lies, it was the liar loans that crashed the mortgage market in 07, 08. Okay. So, but I think you're right about the real estate market. And I think that could be the canary in the mine cage. And there's another element that's really depressing the real estate market in Canada. I don't know about it in the US. And that's that our municipal taxes have gone through the roof in the last, basically over the COVID period. A lot of people's home taxes, their residential home taxes, their school taxes have doubled. And that's completely outlandish. And that's clearly in Canada, anyways. That's going to be a big force that puts a damper on real estate prices and favors the jurisdictions that aren't burdening their ratepayers with these kind of tax increases.
I agree. Before I comment on that, Norman, anything you want to add?
No, Danny's said it very well, and I'm I'm a firefighter. I'm not an economist, and like I told Danie, I said I haven't got a clue, and if there were 10 inklings to a clue, I wouldn't have an inkling about that. So I'm good at spending money, though.
Well, you'll have some in the future here, my friend. But no, it's just that I didn't want you to feel left out in the discussion.
Oh no,
I want to
no, this is Danie's wheelhouse.
Oh, no, for sure. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, because that's another, you just brought up again. These are the tranches or the sub points within the thesis, right? So, yes, let me articulate briefly, if I may, on what you just said about real estate and taxes. So, we talked about what President Trump is doing with unwinding income tax. That has other implications because he's going to remove inside of that excise tax on bogus taxes on cars, which is ridiculous. And all the emissions nonsense with that, like you were saying, Norman, earlier with the carbon myth. We have the same problem here, and depending on what blue state or city that you're in, especially with me here in LA, I'm well familiar with that. He's going to remove property tax because property tax was never part of the Constitution. They stuck that in maritime law. So people thought, well, if I own my home from the bank note, which by the way, the bank, as you know, doesn't produce any products or services, lives off the back of your bonds and sweat equity, which the Bible says you cannot tax a man by the sweat of his brow. The whole thing was artificial and BS to begin with. So it all has to be unwound. So here in this side of the US, North America, is going to remove the income tax, the excise tax, the property tax, and a big one, capital gains tax, which has been another demonic hamstring, which is going to affect foreign currencies and certain cryptos. So a good example to your point, Daniel, is I have family in Florida. They're having issues over there with insurance, where a lot of the banks are they're buckling under the pressure. So they're trying to grab what they can from these people on their way down. And I'm going to mention one of the banks, Bank of America or Bank of America, because I'm not a big fan of theirs, is charging a lot of the seasoned citizens out there double insurance policies or increasing the taxes, property taxes on the condo or the unit, so much so that it's prohibiting people being able to live there, being forced out of their homes because they want to try to buy up those properties and put them on the black market for auction, basically, or on their write-off books, if you will. So that is becoming problematic. We have seen an increase over last year with the Biden in inflation. What happens, Daniel, in a dying economy, a central bank economy? They're only supposed to last 50 years. We're way over that mark by about 5 years, right? Since Nixon took us off the gold standard in 71, we're about 54 years, we're about 4 years too overdue. So you have a hyperinflation when you have a dying currency. We have a dying economic system. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I'm just bringing it for the conversation. So what does President Trump do? He offsets it with energy, right? You see what he's doing with Greenland, or what he wants to propose with that. Because shipping ports becomes a supply chain issue. There's a whole, if you look geographically in those areas, there's a whole opening right there where the U.S. can take advantage between China and a lot of neighboring countries to get that supply port to a straight line to the U.S. and back. It means a faster supply chain and a cheaper one. Ultimately, it's leading to energy as he drills with, as you said, Norman, a renewable energy source, rightly so. That drives down the cost of food and gas, which will help people compensate as he removes the taxes, as he shifts us from a central bank false economy to a people's economy based on real assets. That's what we see as this crossover or this convergence. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the tax issue.
I think we're in a very risky position right now, John. That and this is why taxes are so important, because when you're in a declining economy and inflation starts becoming the issue, not just because of bad monetary policy, but also because of manufacturing problems and this burden of lies that you have to carry, you get yourself in a death spiral. And I'll use the case of property taxes, okay? We've got a situation in Canada, I think your situation is quite the same, that when you've got inflation taking over, the price of your property goes up for no real reason. And because of that, your taxes go up for no real reason.
Right.
And that trend just gets worse as your economy starts failing. And so it's very important at this stage, because I think we're in a very vulnerable stage right now. We have to transition from what I call a world of scarcity to a world of abundance, which is necessarily based on truth. You've got to get rid of that overburden of lies. And one of the ways of breaking that vicious cycle we could find ourselves in is eliminating those taxes on certain key things. Property tax is an important one. Income tax is also very important. I look at a rich country like Canada And I have worked in the boiler rooms of this country, and I can tell you, I don't see a good reason for income tax here. The only reason we have income tax is because we have so much built-in corruption. That's why that's why we have income tax. That's my personal feeling, but it's
Yeah.
based on good numbers.
Well-
I'd like to mention, speaking of property tax, in the province of Ontario, we have what's called the Ontario Municipal Act. And Section 17 of the Municipal Act states clearly that the province cannot borrow, lend, or tax. And yet the province is borrowing, lending, and taxing
And
illegally.
taxing on unrealized gains, Norman. That's the other thing.
Yes.
Inflation is unrealized gains.
Yeah, so it's written.
Good point.
Ontario is already free of property tax, but the people that live here are still paying it because they don't know any better.
Well, and I'll do you one better, Norman. You're absolutely right, both of you. Unrealized or anticipated gains to whom? The banks, not the people. It's all a con job. It's been a farce the entire time. In our Constitution, there is nothing. Trust me, I've done the work for years. I could go into it. I've researched with our team. There isn't a single law in the IRS/ERS that he's converting into tariffs. Tariffs worked. They worked when we were a constitutional republic. They'll work again, right? It's something old, something new. There's no laws on the books that show that if an individual, you have to pay any taxes. And going back to what we're talking about property tax, people pay it because they don't know, because the realtors don't know. They're just defaulting on what the banks tell them to do. So they just pass on the buck. But there's no law that says that that property tax you could have a trust and the trust could buy it, and you don't even have to register with a municipality or state, because people think, well, I own the mortgage, which by Black's Law Dictionary is a debtor's prison. Look it up. Then people think, well, I own the land. No, because you still signed an agreement with the state municipality. So they still own the land, right? What's lot stand for? Lease on title. So do you really own it? Not if you go through their system. So the whole thing, Daniel, has to be unwound. It's all been a pack of lies. And that's what we're working.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. We
working
can't
here.
talk about private ownership in North America unless we can actually own the land.
Exactly. Which
And
is
so
why
this is part of the infrastructure of lies, the network of lies that's burdening us.
absolutely. And we're unburdening what has been. Take a shot at that certain binary person. As we wrap things up today, gentlemen, always a pleasure and honor. I look forward to this every month with you. Last words you have for the audience, and where can people find your respective work?
Well, I'm mostly offline, so I can't really provide you with an inventory of my my work. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I'm much the same. I appear on a number of podcasts, the Sovereign Soul Show, Linda Paris, McAllister TV, and I've got a Give, Send, Go, Norman Traversy Give, Send, Go.
And we have.
But we're gonna have some major things happen very soon. Danie and I spent the day together 2 days ago, and we've got something that if we're checking to make sure it is true, and if it is true, what's going to happen is all hell's going to break loose here in Ontario. It's good, and in a good way.
We're going to bring you on as soon as you do verify that, Norman, because we want to hear that.
Yeah.
And we have all your links, of course, Norman. So I know that you guys are close cousins. I know that Daniel works for pizza, so it works out.
Yeah, Danie works for. Yeah, he does. You got your pizza, didn't you?
I think you're behind one payment, Norman.
No. I got the pizza that day. Oh no, I didn't. Sorry.
I'll cover the next one, Daniel, for you. No problem.
Okay, yeah.
I'll spot you.
Ottawa makes great pizza.
Do they really?
Really, it's
Some of the best.
Montreal style pizza, and the cheese is the last thing on it.
Huh. I'll have to
We
remember
don't
that.
have, our toppings are not toppings. The cheese is the last thing.
We'll have
It's,
to-
So
it's
they
really,
rarely put pineapple on pizza in Canada too. That's the other
No,
thing.
thank God.
yeah, exactly.
To me, that's my Italian heritage. That's sacrilege, but you know, to each their own. But we'll put your links, Norman, in the description, and
Thank
definitely
you.
looking forward. Oh, of course, definitely looking forward to having you guys on, of course, each month, but especially next month as you uncover this little riddle.
If what we believe is true, it's, what do you say, Danny? 500 billion?
Well, we'll wait for the numbers to come in, but it could be big.
Wow.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and you will get a phone call as soon as we can verify it.
Please, that'd be great. I'd love it
Yeah.
because we're going to bring it on next month anyway. But it gives the audience
Okay.
something to anticipate for what's coming. And I think I can say, guys, that May is a pretty exciting month with all this buildup. You know, the old adage, April showers, May flowers, and there's something to that. This year, even Trump said we'll be celebrating in May. So I think that has multiple comms. And of course, folks, you know, one of our chief sponsors is for foreign currencies, and we've talked about that a lot all the time. So if you have dinar, dong, Zim bonds, or Venezuelan Bolivar and Thai baht, and a whole host of other countries and provinces, or you want to add to the cash of what you have, we will leave that link in the description as well. Daniel Mesrobian and of course, Norman Traversy. Appreciate you both, gentlemen. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for your wonderful knowledge and passion. I know our audience appreciates it, as does our team. And we look forward to having you on again very soon.
Thank you, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
Our pleasure.